On This Week in Enterprise Tech, there's data in the water, your next computer might be a rat brain, and Colby Moore from Synack drops in to tell us why you got hacks in space. Quiet on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Quiet. This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 155, recorded August 28th, 2015. Colby Moore, Synack, and hacks in space. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Are you hiring? With ZipRecruiter.com, you can post to 100-plus job sites, including social networks, all with a single click. Screen, rate, and hire the right candidates fast. Try ZipRecruiter with a free 4-day trial now at ZipRecruiter.com/Twilight. Welcome to Twilight. This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Ballecer, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. And I'm joined by my regular cast of characters, starting with, that's right, Mr. Geek in Paradise himself, Brian Chee. Brian, how are things in Hawaii?
Good. Actually, a nice shout out to the crew of the NOAA ship Okeamus. We got a chance to go and play tourist on that. Their ROV is spanky. I wish I could borrow it. And it must be nice to have that kind of money because their video rig is jaw-dropping.
Well, lots of money buys good tech. And speaking of good tech, we have a good co-host in Mr. Curtis Franklin from Information Week Radio. Curtis, you keep changing either your location or your background. I'm never sure what it is. Where are you coming to us today?
Well, we're actually here from the Swamp Studio. Just got a little blue hover-around background behind me to shield some of the disconcerting changes that are taking place here in the studio. And apologize if you hear a little hiss on this end. At the moment, we are experiencing a true downpour as we kind of get ready for a tropical storm that's supposed to hit us early next week. So nothing but fun and games during the rainy season here in the Sunshine State.
Well, I'm glad that you're ready for some fun and games because we definitely have some fun and games for you in this episode. Now, you may remember last week we had Colby Moore in a pre-recorded segment, his Q&A session from Black Hat DEF CON. He showed us his research into, well, the Global Star Satellite Network, showed how insecure it is. We have him in studio, and we'll be bringing him in just a little while. But before that, let's go ahead and jump into the blips. This first one is all about cheap cooling, fast deployment, and disaster-resistant DCs that float. Now, these are the things that San Francisco-based Nautilus Data Technologies claims that their colo on a boat will provide once they finish their first data center barge. Though the idea of a floating data center isn't new, Nautilus has already built a proof of concept, and now it plans to build out 4 2-megawatt data halls on a 250-foot barge currently docked at Mare Island Naval Shipyard, 20 miles north of San Francisco. Entrepreneurs Arnold McHale and Daniel Kikai think that the value is obvious. Access to cheap cooling, the ability to move an entire DC, natural defense against fire and earthquake, and the ability to power the DC from barge or land. The first vessel will cost $24 million, should be finished in 6 months, and the construction should be easily repeatable with a total of 5 planned for locations around the world.
Google is bringing more containers to the cloud. Google's compute engine infrastructure as a service will have added appeal to developers now that the company has taken its Google Container Engine out of its alpha phase and made it generally available. Google Container Engine, which goes by the acronym GKE to avoid being confused with Google Compute Engine, or GCE, orchestrates the launch and management of Docker containers on a cluster on Google Compute Engine. In many ways, this is the answer to Amazon's container service, which was announced last November at Amazon Web Services reInvent Show, which orchestrates the launch of Docker containers on EC2. Docker containers make it easier to move software around between clusters, data centers, or clouds. Now, as it's emerged as a de facto standard, the Docker formatting approach has served largely as the model for the AppC specification of the Open Container Initiative. Google's offering is welcome, but look for all the major players to keep developing service around containers in the cloud.
Well, our friends at TSA have given away the keys to our luggage during a Washington Post interview. It's a clear example of just how badly TSA understands security. A TSA representative briefly showed off a set of TSA master keys for a photo op. Now we've heard all about services like Key.me, where you take photos of your keys to store them in the cloud so you can make duplicates. Well, just from this photo, hackers will be able to have a shortcut to reproduce those very keys. I compare this to when Bloomberg's Matt Miller held up his Bitcoin certificate with the QR code clearly visible. Yo ho ho.
OpenStack gets a $100 million shot in the arm. Mirantis, which develops an industrial version of OpenStack for telcos and large enterprises, has received a $100 million boost from Intel, making a case for them being the player in an OpenStack field that also includes Cisco's Piston and MetaCloud, IBM's Blue Box, and EMC's cloud scaling. The deal, which includes $25 million in cash and $75 million in equity, should help Mirantis strengthen their turnkey appliances that enable OpenStack-based cloud computing and expand their customer profile, which currently includes Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, Telestra, and Orange, among others. For its part, Intel hopes that the investment will secure their place in virtual infrastructure management while also accelerating their Cloud for All initiative that aims to make public, private, and hybrid cloud easy to deploy as long as it's deployed on an Intel platform.
Microsoft SharePoint Server 2016 enters preview. Microsoft is finally ready to release a couple of new services for public technical review. SharePoint Server 2016 and a new cloud hybrid search offering for SharePoint Server 2013 and 2016. The SharePoint server is built on the same platform as SharePoint Online, so IT administrators who download the preview will recognize similarities between the two, along with some new features. Now, there are a ton of those new features, many of them aimed at ease of management and better compliance with regulations, but IT admins planning to download the SharePoint Server 2016 preview should note that the preview cannot be upgraded to RTM at the time of release.
So do you know what the LTE-U fight is all about? And in this corner is, well, the fight over the newly proposed LTE-U, where mobile carriers would be able to cozy up into the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi band, is heating up. In a never-ending search for more spectrum, the mobile industry is trying to say that since the 5 gigahertz uniband is unlicensed, they should be allowed to use it for a new variant of the LTE wireless protocol. On one hand, we're now talking about truly transparent personal microcells, but it also throws a lot of trash into an otherwise unsullied 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. Keep tuned, because this is going to be a battle royal in FCC filings regarding something called Docket 15-105.
Your network's weakest links are your mobile devices. If you have more than 2,000 devices on your network, there's a 50% chance that at least 6 of them are infected. That's the takeaway from a Checkpoint survey that attempted to find the primary threat vector for the modern enterprise. The survey looks at the uneasy balance between accepting the productivity boosts of BYOD acceptance and the almost certainty that you don't have a good way to keep BYOD devices in compliance. Trying to move past BYOD scary headlines, Checkpoint went deeper into the data and discovered that it's not actually BYOD itself that's a security risk, but the fact that those devices are too easy to be connected from anywhere, including in places that compromise security best practices. Well, that does it for the blips. Coming up in just a bit, we're going to be jumping into an enterprise bite. But before we do that, let's go ahead and take a moment to thank the sponsor for this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech. And, well, it's got to be ZipRecruiter. Now, let me ask you something. Are you hiring, or are you responsible for hiring? Because if you are, you understand that the success or failure of your business depends on the people that you bring in. They're the ones who are going to have the next great idea. They're the ones who are going to give you productivity. They're the ones who are going to be the public face of your business. Well, right now, the summer, especially the end of the summer, it's the best time to get the best employees. A lot of your competitors are snoozing, and some of the best hires are coming off their vacations, fresh, refreshed, and ready to work. Well, if you want to reach out to them, you could do the old-fashioned way, which is maybe post in a newspaper, maybe get on a jobs board or two, but that's just inefficient. You see, ZipRecruiter understands that to get the candidates you want, the ones that you need before they're snatched up, you have to post to as many places as possible. And thanks to ZipRecruiter.com, you can post to 100-plus job sites with just a single click and be instantly matched to candidates from over 6 million resumes. But you don't have to listen to me. Stephanie, a real ZipRecruiter client, wrote, ZipRecruiter is affordable and so easy to use. I can write, edit, and change out of my job openings very easily. When I've had questions, their customer service team has had outstanding, patient, and knowledgeable service. I've done a ton of hiring already via Zip, and I intend to continue doing so. Just post once, and within 24 hours, you can watch your candidates roll into ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use interface. ZipRecruiter has been used by over 400,000 businesses, and now you can try it for free. Getting the right people for your company is so important. Do you really want to leave it up to chance? And today, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. Go to ZipRecruiter.com/Twyet. That's ZipRecruiter.com/Twyet. And we thank ZipRecruiter for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's go ahead and jump into the bites. I actually have one that I really want to talk about. Chee, I will say I was conflicted because I really wanted to talk about this whole LTE over Wi-Fi, the carriers using unlicensed spectrum to deliver their services. But there is something else it's a bit geekier, it's a bit deeper dive, and I thought Twyet might be a good place for it. And that is IBM's Rat Brain. I don't know if you've heard about this, but last year, IBM announced the creation of a chip that more closely resembled an organic brain rather than a traditional silicon IC. Rather than storing data in memories, the new chip worked more like neurons in the brain. Now, the reason why they did this is because while digital computers are great at processing calculations, doing logic, they're not so great at finding patterns in that data. That's what the human brain does innately. When you think of one thing, it reminds you of 4 other things, and that's just because of the way that the brain is wired. Well, digital computers don't do that. Digital computers follow instructions. They follow a very linear track of logic. Now, if we were able to combine the two, get something that works more like a human brain and combine it with the just brute force calculations of a digital IC, well, that's sort of the holy grail. That means you get something that can process data really quickly and do pattern recognition. Chee, I want to throw this over to you first. You work in a university. I know that actually the University of Hawaii has researchers who are looking at this idea of neuron computing. Have you heard much about this research? Have you been following it at all?
The nice thing about neuron-style computing is, of course, pattern recognition. And pattern recognition has the potential for scientists to eliminate a lot of the noise that you would find in data sets. So let's use my underwater observatory as an example. We have thousands and thousands of hours of video. And does that mean we have to hire a whole bunch of grad students just to sit there and watch sea snow floating by on the occasion that maybe some new fish or squid or shrimp or something goes in front of the camera? Pattern recognition makes it a lot easier. Right now, pattern recognition requires an amazing amount of computing power, and it's not very good because pattern recognition typically is, kind of blocky, and you don't have the ability to have any fine detail. So you can't easily tell if a shrimp has 2 antennas or 6 antennas. But a rat, even something as simple as a rat brain, can do this really easily. So it allows you to go and put something really important like finding good data amongst all the noise right into a camera instead of having to put a baby supercomputer behind it.
Yeah,
that change science.
That pattern recognition is actually huge, and I don't think people realize how huge it is. Right now, when we do pattern recognition, I have to code it, so it's approximated pattern recognition. I essentially have to think of all the things that the sensors, the camera, whatever it is that I'm using to input data from the real world, all the possible scenarios that they might encounter, and figure out how to classify that thing, that event, that object. Well, if I had something that had digital neurons rather than the straight logic gates of silicon ICs, then I could give it the idea. I could say, look, a whale looks like this. And it could make guesstimations. It could say, well, this is pretty close to this pattern. I'm going to go ahead and push this over to the logic side now, and maybe the logic side can hash it out more. If you can combine the two, a digital neuron computer and the IC logic gate, it now means that you could do the processes of the human brain, but just do them multiple levels of magnitude faster than the human brain. Curtis, I want to throw this over to you. The example I gave when I did this presentation before is that it's like telling a computer what a chair or a ladder is. And in the old way, you actually had to have a database that had pictures of every chair and every ladder that it can match against. This is, you tell it, oh, well, a chair is something you sit on and a ladder is something you climb, and it will be able to do the recognition. What are the applications in big data for that? I mean, if you had a computer that could actually make those kinds of extrapolations beyond just basic input-output digital data, what does that mean?
Oh, there are all sorts of applications for something like that. Let's take something really simple. If you're trying to figure out whether people on social media are saying good things about you or bad things about you. Right now, if you want to automate that process, basically what you have to do is go in and do some language pattern recognition where you input all of these good-sounding words, input a lot of bad sounding words, and then run it across the entire Twitter sphere to see which of, the most of those are showing up in context of your product or company. If you could tell it, here's what positive interaction is like. Here are some of the qualities of a positive interaction. Here are some of the qualities of a complaint. Then it can go off, and if there is someone who is complaining but using a different set of words, you still get it. On the other hand, if there are people saying really nice things about you, using words that you wouldn't use in the marketing department, you'll catch those as well. So that's a fairly trivial example, but that's the sort of thing that goes on in business every single day and churns through billions and billions and billions of CPU cycles. And tools like this represents could make all of that much faster and much, much cheaper.
There is another angle to this that IBM is trying to push, and that is that there's actually massive power savings when you start computing like a neural network rather than like a digital network. In a digital network, even though we've gotten much better over the last couple of decades at lowering the power requirements, of letting us throttle down the CPU to only the bare minimum, almost basically suspending CPU operations when you don't need the calculations. What you can do with a neural network is you don't process in levels. You do spikes. You do spikes of activity. And their research shows that they could use these in, say, phones to reduce the power consumption by up to 90%. Now, the CPU is not actually pulling a lot of power inside of a phone, but still, if you took this technology and you extrapolated it from there to phones and to laptops and to servers, you are looking at a lot of power savings, and that's what IBM is saying. They're like, look, as these chips get more and more complex, we're going to see more and more of these applications open up to us. Now, don't get too excited, because even though it sounds like a brave new world, their more advanced rat brain digital chip has 48 million neurons, which sounds like a lot until you realize that the human brain has about 100 billion. So, well, most human brains have 100 billion. I'm not sure about my technical director, Cranky Hippo. We may have to count those up later on. Yeah, he's fuming right now. So look for this in the future. I just don't think we're going to hit Skynet just yet. Chee, Curtis, anything left on this before we move on?
No, not really. It's got an amazing amount of promise. And, just having it something really small means, gee, we could have more intelligent things like fingerprint readers that actually internal to the chip can detect things like pulse and determine, and figure out differences between ridges and a photocopy. Ought to be interesting when you can put more intelligence into the Internet of Things.
Indeed.
And I would add to that one of the main uses that we're seeing out of a lot of the personal computer sciences right now are in the personal helpers, things like Cortana and Siri, things that want to aid you. Now imagine if we could do that with a system that even has the intelligence of, say, a reasonably smart Labrador retriever. All of a sudden, its ability to look at you, figure out what you're thinking or feeling, figuring out your patterns of behavior and applying them means that the world changes in some significant ways. I think that even a Labrador retriever is a way off, but it does promise some really exciting potential.
I just realized I would want one of these built into a Google Glass style appliance so that I could have a little readout that tells me, oh, this person's angry, or oh, this person's lying to you. I mean, just something that could find the tells. Now there's a product I want in my future enterprise. When we come back from the pre-recorded video, we're bringing in Colby Moore. That's right, folks. You wanted to talk to him because he came up with the research that showed that the global star satellite network was, well, laughably insecure. We're going to be speaking with him both about the research and about what it means for future communications across space. But before that, let's bring you back to Black Hat DEF CON. We had a chance to speak to, well, a very interesting company, Bay Dynamics, here in the Bay Area, that found out a way to figure out if you're being attacked by a nation state. I'm Father Robert Ballecer, the digital Jesuit with Twit TV, here at Black Hat 2015 in Las Vegas, Nevada. I've got the privilege of standing next to Gotham from Bay Dynamics. Now, Gotham, what is Bay Dynamics?
Robert, that's a great question. Thanks for having me over here. So Bay Dynamics is a cyber risk predictive analytics company that provides actionable visibility into your cybersecurity blind spots, and it helps the customers to act on them before it's too late.
Threat analytics has become a big business, especially in the last year with some very high-profile breaches. But unlike some other analytic companies that will just look at threat analysis by what they're catching in their honeypots or across their client base, you have a specialty that I think is very important, and that is you've developed an attack profile that can indicate a state-sponsored attack. Tell me a little bit about that. How do you look at a series of attacks and say this looks like a nation state rather than just a botnet kicked off by some disgruntled troll in Nigeria?
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great question, because I think that's the question which customers are looking for too, saying, is it a nation state sponsored attack? Is it a cyber espionage? So how do I really come back and find what's really happening? So from a Bay Dynamics standpoint, we have our purpose-built Risk Fabric platform. And what this platform does, it has two key aspects. It's going to come back and profile the entire user base you have, which is there within your organization. In the past, we used to keep on talking about advanced malware, APTs. That used to be the buzzword in the marketplace. Now, when we saw in 2014 with what happened and with all the breaches, whether it was the Home Depot or eBay, or what you saw happening with the Sony hack, or even in 2015 with Anthem or OPM, where was the malware? There was no malware involved. What they were doing is legitimate user credentials were being compromised. They became an insider within your organization with all the right credentials. They were able to laterally move within your organizations. They've been there for months. We heard with OPM, more than 12 months within OPM, untethered access within the organizations.
One of the topics that we talked about on our show is this idea of increased noise before an attack. And there are a lot of different threat analytics companies that are starting to take a look at, well, do I see patterns before I see the big attack? Am I going to see an attack on my telephone tree? Am I going to see an attack where people start probing my endpoints and it indicates something bigger rather than just a standard sweep of the internet? What are you doing to turn that into actionable intelligence?
No, that's a great question, because I think that's exactly what is happening. What they are doing right now is, for example, if I'm an insider, what they are doing is they're becoming an insider. If it's an imposter, becoming an insider. And what they do is they will do an unusual user behavior. Not anomalous, because again, unusual doesn't mean it's anomalous or malicious in nature. It's a very unusual activity with respect to yourself or your peer group or your department. And the systems need to be able to catch those patterns. Gotham is in the marketing department. He should be going back to the marketing servers. Why is Gotham really going back to the financial servers? What's really happening? Does he have permissions to do that? Is he showing high privilege access? Why is he showing high privilege access? Gotham doesn't have high privilege account access to go to a financial server. You will start showing unusual activity. And I think that's a trick, that if your system earlier on cannot catch those unusual activities, then as you can see, they become the untethered access within your network, and that's how they were able to drive slow leak. So slow and low is what we call it, and then do a smash and grab. That's one thing which we see on the user standpoint. The second piece of the puzzle which we see is how do you observe high privilege access? Everybody says, oh yeah, my C-level execs and my system administrator are my super users, are my power users. They are the ones who have high privilege access. That's a wrong answer, because now you're profiling the wrong people. What the attackers are doing is they're picking up people like you and me, and then you see them observing high privilege access? Can I observe them doing high privilege account access? Are they showing risky behavior? Is this particular user showing a high variety of unusual activities, going to different endpoints, different systems, accessing different servers, my crown jewels? That's an unusual activity you want to pick up on a high privilege side. The third thing is vendors, your third party, your supply chain. We've been talking to a lot of customers. In fact, one of our customers said, I have 100,000 employees. I have 250,000 vendor accounts. Everybody talks about giving me a profile of my organization. Who's going to tell me what the vendors are doing? They have the access to the same systems, to the same resources, to the same assets. Who's going to come back and help me profile that? What we saw happening with OPM. Key Point Systems, one of the biggest contractors, gets breached, drives a major secondary breach in OPM. What happened in HVAC vendor in the case of Target? HVAC vendor as a contractor gets breached. Somebody uses the HVAC vendor's credentials to come back and now drive a major breach within Target. We are now seeing the third-party risk as becoming the biggest vector of risk for all the organizations right now. How do we come back and profile that piece? If they are doing something unusual, can I raise a red flag? Can I hold the vendor accountable for this stuff instead of me adding more resources and spending more money to come back and solve this problem? So I think that's what you need to be looking into.
Fantastic. There you have it. If you run an enterprise, maybe it's time for you to reconsider what your attack surface looks like. Gautam, I want to thank you very much for speaking with us, for being on the show. Could you please tell them, the folks playing along at home, where they can find you, where they can find Bay Dynamics, and where they might be able to find more about what you could do for their enterprise?
Absolutely. So, yeah, so if you're looking to hear more in terms of what Bay Dynamics can do for you, as a trusted partner from a risk management perspective, come to baydynamics.com. Or you can see us on the Twitter at baydynamics.com or on LinkedIn. Or if you're at Black Hat, guys, my booth number is 666. Devil is in the details. You want to know more about it? Come to booth number 666. You'll find me over there.
Thank you for speaking with us, and thank you for joining us. I'm Father Robert Ballecer from Black Hat 2015. That was actually a very interesting interview because he was trying to explain before the interview exactly what kind of signature they use to determine whether or not an attack is coming from a nation state. I think that kind of threat intelligence is going to become more and more important, especially in the light of some of the more recent breaches. Chee, what do you think about that? Is that going to become a subset of threat intelligence, knowing when you might be targeted by a nation state?
Actually, I think what we're going to start seeing is, well, this is me speculating. I'd love to see that kind of service being fed into zone firewalls and security devices, just like we're doing GeoIP services now. Something like that, that'd be really, really cool because you want your IDSs and IPSs to be able to do cross correlation across things. So being able to say, hey, why is this person going to admin or finance when he's in shipping? Is something that should be happening in a lot of IDSs and IPSs, but not always. Usually you've got to go and staple together a whole bunch of things and pray it's compatible, but having someone that can feed it as a service means it gets updated a lot faster, and you start getting better correlation engines on the back end, which can only help.
Curtis, I want to drag you into this a little bit. When we've talked about nation-state attacks in the past year or so, we focus on things like OPM. We focus on things like the just ridiculous amount of data that has been exfiltrated from the United States government. But as far back as, well, the start of Twyat, we've been hearing unconfirmed rumors, unconfirmed stories of nation-states, including China, Russia, and the United States, doing particularly sophisticated attacks to get at something in particular. And it hasn't always been a nation-state attacking a nation-state. Most of the time it has been a nation-state attacking a large or medium enterprise. Is there awareness now in your audience, especially among executives over at Information Week, a radio, that they're not just dealing with a rogue hacker, a black hat every once in a while, but they may be meeting up with organized cyber attacks?
I think that there are many of the CIOs that I talked with who are quite aware of that. And what they see is that the information or the economic activity of their company, often a very large company, would be of interest to foreign government actors. And certainly, if you look at things like the New York Stock Exchange, major energy suppliers, major industrial firms, they're all very aware of this, as are the big the big banking companies. The place where it gets much trickier is the smaller companies. You know, a company that might have only 1,000 employees be doing something that it thinks is fairly innocuous. They don't understand why anyone would be interested in them. They don't understand the concept that they might be seen as either a test case or a cog in a series of events that they can't see, but that some other actor has put into play. So again, at the very large end of the business scale, yes, there's understanding that this is no longer a case of governments acting against one another and a business getting caught in the overspray. This is one where they could be a genuine target. Smaller companies, it's much trickier. And I will say that even very, very small companies are seeing themselves targeted. I would say that, as an example, yesterday, my dear wife, who has a very, very small website, had her homepage taken down by a group of Iranian hackers. And we still haven't figured out why. The what was easy to diagnose. The why we're still scratching our heads over.
Well, Curtis, we all know that your family is actually deeply, deeply rooted in nation-state hacking. So, I mean, you can drop the charade. We understand. Well, I will say one thing. Do you remember when we first started Twiat, and we had an episode talking about controlling electronic devices from source to deployment? And at that time, there were the crazy people who were saying, is it right that we have some of the most sensitive equipment and some of the most abundant equipment, everything from USB flash drives to firewalls that were being manufactured in a country whose government we were afraid of injecting things into our products? Just goes to show you how much things have changed since we started the show. Now, gentlemen, let's get away from this. I mean, we could spend all day talking about conjecture and spreading rumors, but instead, I'd like to go to one of the sources, one of the people who I think had, well, at least the top 5 presentations at Black Hat DEF CON. That's right, I'm talking about Colby Moore from Synack. Colby, thank you very much for coming up here and making the trip to the Twit Brick House here in Petaluma to show us your research.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me.
Now, we did see your Q&A last week. We had a pre-recorded video that we showed our audience, so they understand in broad strokes what you did, what your research was about. But since we have you here, could you do a quick summary of what you did and what you found?
Yeah, for sure. So in the previous years, you know, I've attended these computer security conferences, and the hot topic is hacking satellites. And everyone kind of comes up with their own spin on it, but I felt like a lot of the hacks in the past were very theoretical. So I wanted to take kind of my own stab at it. And I was very familiar with Global Star's line of products. They produce a series of asset trackers. So, you know, you have an armored car, or you have your yacht that you want to keep an eye on, or they also produce personal locator beacons. So you're out in the woods and you know, you're lost and you need help. You press a button on this beacon, and these devices talk through the Global Star satellites. And they relay the data back to the you know, appropriate responder or back to your infrastructure. So I was like, hey, you know, let's take a look at this. So I bought a bunch of the consumer tech out there, and I started looking at them and realized that the satellite communication chips used in the consumer tech are the same ones used in the commercial tech and the military tech as well. And so, you know, it's kind of a great bang for a buck for research. For $40, I could go buy a little satellite transmitter, and you know, that if there was a vulnerability, it would spread across, you know, the whole industry. So basically, I found a way to intercept these satellite communications on either the uplink to the satellite or back on the downlink, and ended up uncovering that there's no encryption, no signing on these communications, and really am able to view anything that's sent. Predominantly, they're used in asset tracking tags, so I can watch where your stuff is at any given time.
I do want to talk about that because there's a fascinating aspect about you being able to track assets in real time. Actually, that's not even call it assets. You're tracking really behaviors in real time, because that there's all sorts of analytics that can be pulled out of that. But I think what was shocking to most people is they just assumed that any sort of communication that you're going to be having with a space-based transport system is going to be encrypted, or at the very least, it's going to have some sort of authentication before you can read the packets. That's actually what blew me away about your research. There's no encryption. They don't even try. It's not weak encryption. It's completely clear text.
For sure, yeah. Let me chime in there. You know, I talked to a correspondent. She was a correspondent in the Middle East for roughly about 10 years. And her and her colleagues all used these satellite trackers to track themselves in case they were kidnapped. And they were under the impression that the communication was secure. Now to find out that this communication is not secure and that maybe they were actually being tracked the whole time. And these devices maybe were being used to target people, who knows? But, the barrier to entry was very low. And, probably going forward, these devices should not be used in, mission critical scenarios like that.
We've got a comment in our chat room from Bleep Blurp, a longtime member of our community, and he's bringing up something that actually you did address during the Q&A session, which is they're saying, well, just looking at those signals is a crime, and that kind of reminds me of Oracle's response to the bug hunts, which is, well, you're not supposed to reverse engineer our code, so naturally, security should be okay. It's sort of sticking your head in the sand and saying, well, if it's illegal for people to look at the signals, they're not going to look at the signals. And at one point in your Q&A, you made pains to say, look, I have never injected traffic. I've done all the tests to say, yeah, I know exactly how this communicates, how these protocols work. But have you received any sort of that pushback of saying, well, this is not research you should be doing because now you're showing people how to invade these systems?
Honestly, no. I think everyone's been very supportive of it. And, I should make clear that I was really focusing on intercepting my own traffic and, developing a capability that could inject back into the network, and really did my best to not interfere with anything and do anything illegal. But overall, people have been very supportive and really curious about how their data is being transmitted. And I think that's something manufacturers need to do, is be very transparent about, how is your data being transmitted, is it encrypted, and what are the chances of actual interception, just so you as the consumer can make an educated guess in how to use the tech.
Well, as long as it's here, let's go ahead and look at the box. So this is what you created. This is your research. This box right here can listen in on any of the signals being sent on a Globalstar network, up to, what was the range again, about a mile or so?
Yeah, so there's a couple components here. The way the Globalstar system works is that it works as what they call a bent pipe system. So essentially, the satellite receives signals from the user terminal, and then it just simply repeats that data back down to Earth. And so you can actually intercept either on the uplink or on the downlink. So my initial research focused on intercepting on the uplink. It's a little cheaper that way, but the research can easily be translated to the downlink. So this is my uplink interception capability. It was built for under $1,000. That was part of the goal of my research, is, let's get more hacker eyes looking on these satellite systems. So yeah, we can take a look inside. Up here is the antenna, really an off-the-shelf Globalstar antenna, and we open it up. And inside, the brains of the beast is this USRP B200 made by Edis Research. It's a software radio that can tune from anywhere from,
We've been salivating over one of those. We really wanted one of those on our Maker show.
Well, feel free to borrow it sometime and take a look. But essentially, we tune this to about 1.6 gigahertz, and we pipe the data through this low noise amplifier. You kind of see it on the top of the case right here. Oh, there we go. So yep, this is the antenna goes in the low noise amplifier, and this data comes back down into the board, and then we do actually all the decoding and processing in software using GNU Radio and Python for you open source fans out there.
Now, quick question: if they did encrypt their signals, does that software-defined radio board actually have the horsepower to run decryption, or would you have to do that on a connected computer?
The board actually does have a ton of horsepower in it, but it's kind of a pain in the butt to implement those algorithms in an FPGA and stuff. It really would be more easy to do it computer side.
Dump it off.
Yeah. I'm actually playing around with CUDA right now and trying to offload some of the processing to a GPU. I think there's a lot of different ways you can approach it. Really, just barrier to entry.
Well, the amazing thing about this is this actually wasn't that hard to create. I mean, you had to have the know-how. You had to know what to listen for. You had to know how to program the SDR to get on those frequencies. But this is a tiny little box, and I think you said your total bill of materials was under $1,000, right? It's like a $600 software-defined radio, and then the individual components brings it up to about $1,000.
Correct, and the grand even included the asset trackers I was looking at. So really, barrier to entry is low, and it's fantastic.
We have W.A. Wisp, who actually runs his own wireless ISP. He wants to know, how do you handle filtering? Is that done digitally, or is it done in the hardware SDR?
That's actually a great question. I'm not really doing much filtering right now. There's a lot of ways to make this capability more robust. It's more of a proof of concept. I believe the the LNA, the low noise amplifier, does a little bit of that filtering for me. But really, in software, I've just got a supposedly, I guess, a bandpass filter set up just to kind of reject some of the noise.
And this is a line of sight device. So the higher you go, the more signals you can intercept. In fact, you said at the Q&A, you're like, yeah, I got myself a pilot's license because I wanted to fly around and see what I would run into.
Yeah, no, it's kind of funny. You know, I like to take things a little bit too far. I was like, you know what? I've always been interested in flying. This is the perfect opportunity. So I've been working on my private pilot's license. So I've actually taken this capability flying in the air. And, you know, you're able, the higher you go, the more signals you're able to intercept.
And this is not a very directional antenna, right? I mean, that's how it's designed. You don't need to know where the satellite is. It's what's the beam width on this?
You know, supposedly from some manufactured docs, I believe the approximate beam width is around 20 degrees or so. Okay. But, you know, of course, that spreads out quite wide when you're 500 miles out into space.
Exactly.
But
and if you put this up on an antenna, you're high enough where you're going to be intercepting these anytime something comes within, what, quick math here, like 4.5, 5 miles.
Exactly. You know, you go in the tallest building in San Francisco, point this thing off the roof, and you're seeing all sorts of interesting things. You know, funny story, I was in my hotel at Black Hat, and I pointed out my window at McCarran International, and was just watching all sorts of odd data packets come by. Not really sure what they were, but, you know, some various locations in the area.
And something else that we should clarify is because the satellite is that bent pipe, if you intercept it on the upstream or the downstream, you're getting the same data because the satellite's just bouncing it back.
Very correct. So the only thing with intercepting on the downstream is it's more difficult. The signal's much weaker. And you have issues such as Doppler shift, you know, the satellite's flying by really fast, and so you need to compensate for that. But the satellite has about a 2,000-mile window. So if you built an actual ground station, you could see devices for 2,000 miles around you.
Wow. Okay. All right. Now, I have to ask this because you hinted at it during your presentation. This is security research. This is your job. This is what you do. You find things that are broken, and hopefully they get fixed. There were issues about this because you were saying, look, it's not like you can take all the satellites out of space and suddenly put new technology on them. This system was created at a time in which people thought the cost of the equipment would be their protection. It was too expensive for you to buy everything you needed to communicate with one of these satellites out of a goof. But now that I can do it for under $1,000, I think it's got people worried. What was the reaction of Globalstar when you approached them? Because I know you did it right. You went to them and you said, here's my research. This is what I found. I'd like to get your comment. I'd like to see if maybe there's something I missed. How did they react?
Yeah, so I approached Globalstar approximately 180 days before the conferences and said, hey guys, you know, I found an issue I think you might want to take a look at. You know, here's my research. Here's the bug I believe I found. We intend to talk at conferences, but you know, is that okay with you? What do you think? What are your thoughts? You know, maybe a month passed, and we got a letter back from one of the head engineers, and he said, hey, you know, great research. I'd love to know more. Send me the rest of your technical details, which I forwarded on, and we never heard back. He also mentioned that, you know, they do take user privacy very seriously, and they were concerned, and they would address it. And so, you know, I was pretty happy, but it was like, hey, and they're going to let me talk at the conference too. They didn't say no. Presented at the conference, you know, I think things went very well received. And then they issued a press release with really no warning that said some kind of negative things. They were saying that they didn't believe our claims were true. And you know, you can look on Globalstar's website under the press release, but they likened me to I think they said like a shady auto mechanic who's finding things wrong with your car that may not really be wrong. So I kind of wear that as a badge of pride. But you know, I leave my research up to the hacker community to decide. You know, make your own judgment. But you know, it's kind of frustrating when manufacturers respond like that. We've had this happen a lot in the past. But you know, from my experience, what's happened is that whether you disclose or not, someone else will find the bug eventually.
Exactly.
And you know, it's better to get it addressed up front and get the knowledge in the people who's affected's hands as soon as you can. Right.
Because there's always going to be those people, and you know, they've got a valid opinion. They say, well, look, yes, we know things are vulnerable. Please stop hacking that. You know, the hacking ethos died 20 years ago. We don't need to know that things are vulnerable. But then you have people like Miller and Ballecer, who they did their Uconnect presentation. And Ryan, you can chime in on this. One of the things that they said was, look, we just want to know that our research can cause a real world change. we're not taking advantage of it. We're not selling it. Or like the guys from who found the stage fright bug, they sold it for $1,337.
Nothing.
They could have made a lot of money on it, but they're like, look, this research benefits you. It benefits us all as long as you act on it. And it sounds as if FIA did the right thing. It sounds as if Google kind of did the right thing. It sounds like Globalstar is stuck in the old thing, which was, oh, this is not real. This is not real, and you'll never know about it. And this guy's a bad person, so you shouldn't listen to him.
Well, of course, I think there's different teams at play. Some people want to address it differently. But the other thing is, they're a hardware company. They don't deal with these issues on a regular basis. This might be the first disclosure they've ever had. So I can't really blame them. But I hope they come around. And in their statement, they also did say that they are committed to their their customer security and are looking to provide mitigation. So I hope they do that, and I'm curious to see how they will.
That's more PR speak, though. That has to go in on every letter.
Of course.
Yeah. Now, let's talk a little bit about encryption, because that's going to be the next logical step. People will say, okay, well, it's clear text. Obviously, that's a problem. Why wasn't encryption included in the original spec?
It's a great question, and I'm not sure I have a great answer, but I can speculate. So the system was designed and deployed, I think, around early 2000. And encryption just wasn't at the forefront of people's minds. People weren't so worried about security. And, when a system like this is being designed, it's very complex. I think they relied on that security through obscurity. I even found a document on their website from 2009, someone asking, hey, what's the possibility of this data being intercepted? And they said, hardly at all. They coined the term LPI, low probability of interception, and LPD, low probability of detection, which are kind of BS, it seems like to me. And they also happen to mention that no one knows these secret spreading codes the data is sent with, but these were all things that were very easy to reverse engineer. So I think they were really relying on the security through obscurity, and just it wasn't the forefront of their thoughts.
Yeah, and to be fair to Globalstar, we see that a lot. There's a lot of systems that are now coming online, and people are realizing, ooh, if we had it over, we would probably do something a little bit different. Now, before we move off of this, because I want to talk about some of your other research. You've done some fascinating research, not just on Globalstar.
Thank you.
What do you see as a potential upgrade path? Obviously, the next generation is probably going to have some baked-in encryption. Is there a way to fix the current generation of, say, asset tracking devices?
Definitely. There's always a way forward, and I think the way forward is the chips that they're using to send this data. They can send any user-defined data that the integrator chooses to send from a microprocessor. But the deal is that Globalstar has a couple pre-built packet formats that their backend knows how to interpret. But going forward, manufacturers and integrators can integrate kind of their own data formats that are encrypted, but then they're going to have to provide the infrastructure on the back end to decrypt that data and such. Maybe Globalstar will pick up some of these standards or start layering this encryption on, but really all they need to do is add this extra layer.
Let's talk about ShmooCon.
Okay.
This was an interesting piece of work that you did a while back. I remember reading about this, going, "Oh yeah, that's big data analytics." Go figure. You used a what app was it that was running on a phone? So it was it wasn't a hookup app. It was a social app.
Well, sort of. I ended up looking at a lot of dating apps out there. I looked at Tinder. I looked at the one that I talked about ShmooCon was Grindr, the gay dating app that's very popular out here in the Bay Area. What I found was in these dating apps or many of these social networking apps, geolocation information for the user is leaked essentially through the APIs. There's ways to trick the API into giving you anyone's location on the network. And so I was able to track any user on these networks at any given time over many, many days. And I think you were curious about the correlation aspect of it.
Right, because that's one of the things that actually plays into the Globalstar research. If you know locations and if you know behaviors, and especially if you know patterns. For example, if I know that a certain truck that I'm watching makes the same route and it seems to be stopping at 5 different banks during the day, if I'm a person of nefarious intent, I may say, oh, that's probably a vehicle I'm very interested in. What kind of data do you pull out of those applications, or I'll say of this security research, that sounds innocent but could be potentially destructive, damaging?
Yeah. So So what we did, we tested a bunch of willing individuals, and we tracked their movements, over a week or two. And what we were able to find is that the locations where they use these apps, they tend to cluster around certain points at certain times a day. And you clearly are able to see, where's a home location and where's a work location and maybe where the gym is. And you can really infer, where they go when. And you combine that data with, open source information from, Facebook, LinkedIn, various job sites, and you can obtain someone's full pattern of life, where they work, who they are, and it's pretty scary. We had nearly 100% success rate in using this open source intel to identify who a person was, and then from there, do what you will.
I want to go ahead and bring in my my co-hosts here, Brian and Curtis. Let's start with you, Cheebert. Cheebert, this is one of the things that we've talked about on Twite. We've talked about the use of location data in enterprises. We've already seen examples of location data being used in retail. But this is an interesting confluence. But Colby's research, both with the Global Star Network and at ShmooCon, of being able to track things in real time, determine behaviors, and then draw correlations from them. That's sort of the holy grail for marketing to people, isn't it?
Well, not only marketing, but thieves. Look at how crazy people got with, oh, geez, you can just press home on the person's GPS in their car and figure out where they live and, break into their house. And, oh, gee, it's so easy to break into garage doors now. Now we're doing is we're giving people a lot of information. A nefarious person could easily figure out where a person's home is and be able to track them and know how much time they have to, rip the person off. This is things that need to be a little bit more careful with. And then the security industry really hasn't raised that many red flags yet, because location information is pretty sensitive, and we need to do a better job of protecting that.
Curtis, Cheebert brings up the fact that location information is sensitive, but I'm wondering, do we really know that in the enterprise yet? The people that you deal with in the radio show, do you see them finding that, identifying that as something that needs to be dealt with in security policy? Is there a best practices document that I don't know about that's circulating about what we should do for asset tracking and what we should do for real-time location information?
I would say that the acknowledgement that this is a significant issue is growing. What I'm seeing is an increasing number of companies that have created a position that they call the Chief Privacy Officer, whose job it is to think about these things, come up with policies that work within the company, and then make sure that they are applied to not only the company's activities, but activities that take place through the company's subcontractors. Because as we've seen in a number of instances, it's those subcontractors that can be the source of a lot of real problems. Does every company that should have a chief privacy officer have one? Absolutely not. Now, some of those have rolled the function into the chief information security officer or chief security officer. Some others are still coming to the realization, but I'm pleased to say that it is a growing area of recognition and one that people are beginning to address properly. Now, you asked about a best practices document. There are several of these out there, but the problem is that there are differences based upon industry. And so what you tend to see are companies within industries that have, if not standardized, at least built common frameworks for privacy. The real place that you're seeing these frameworks take hold, though, are in some of the regulatory compliance auditors. They're the ones who will audit a company for compliance with some of the regulations that deal with customer and employee information security. They're the ones making sure that standards are adhered to and that best practices are spread through the industry.
Colby, we are running out of time. Unfortunately, we always come to this part of the show where we want to keep talking, but we can't. I do want to throw one more question at you, and it's going to be kind of speculative.
Okay.
This line of research came about because 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, the people who designed the Global Star Network couldn't imagine a time where their communications would be so easily intercepted without $50,000 or $100,000 worth of communications gear. We're seeing a lot of that now. We see it in SCADA devices that are being put online that really shouldn't be online. We're seeing it in Internet of things that really shouldn't ever be connected to any sort of network. What are we going to see, looking into your crystal ball, in 15 years? What will the next generation of security researchers look at and say, how could they be so stupid to do X? What's going to be the big threat vector that we are developing right now that we don't yet see?
You know, that's a really great question, and you know, I wish I could see into the future to tell you. You know, I think things like, you know, the way we're doing encryption now, we've seen that continually break and break and break and break. I think you know, all these new cellular protocols and wireless protocols we're developing, you know, all of this Internet of Things buzz. I think we're really rushing into it, and you know, maybe in the future we're going to realize, you know, why do we architect it like that? You know, this is so ridiculously broken, and we're going to have to live with it and keep building upon it.
You know, it's interesting. We had a representative from Atmel on not too long ago, and what he was saying much of the same thing, which is, look, we have to start doing a security first view of our engineering. Even those people who have nothing to do with security, they're just tinkering, they have to start thinking of that layer at the beginning of the process rather than throwing it on at the end. And you know, maybe it's not a device, maybe it's just a mindset change that we have to say, look, I don't care if you're running a multi-billion-dollar company or if you're a garage tinkerer. If you're not immediately thinking about how this device is going to be abused, you're not doing your job.
No, I think that's a great point, and especially out here in the Silicon Valley, we see all these startups, you know, just pushing to market really quick. You know, let's build now and fix later. And a lot of people, you know, don't have security staff on their teams, and that's kind of a problem. You know, going forward, you know, security does need to be, you know, first of mind.
Chee, I want to give you a last word here. I see you in the chat room. You found that Globalstar actually offers a system on a chip, so that makes it doubly puzzling as to why they wouldn't recognize this research.
Actually, I'm supposedly going to be ordering one because I was considering using it to track buoys in the Pacific.
Is that in case we have an alien invasion and you need to use the tsunami buoys to figure out where they're moving?
Yeah, maybe. But, you know, now that with Colby's research, I'm thinking, man, you know, the new Iridium modems that do SMS-style messaging are sounding better and better, and they're not that expensive anymore. I actually was using Iridium-based modem in my Alaska trip and was allowing people to track where I was going all through Alaska and the Yukon. And $60 a month gives me unlimited SMS messages, both inbound and outbound. Not so expensive anymore.
Fantastic. Well, gentlemen, I want to keep talking, but unfortunately, we've done it again. That's right. Our audience has used up another hour listening to the best dang enterprise podcast in the universe. That's according to 9 out of 10 bent pipe satellites. I want to thank our panelists for being here. We wouldn't have a show without their insight. Colby, let's start with you. You work with Synack. Take your time here. This is for you. Thank you very much for coming up. Could you tell us what Synack is? Could you tell us where we can find them? And of course, can you tell them where they can find your research if they're interested in learning more about what you're doing with Globalstar, what you did with ShmooCon, and all of the work that you do?
For sure. So Synack, we're a startup out here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I like to think of us as kind of a new way of doing security for the enterprise. We maintain this group of vetted researchers. So they're top security researchers all around the globe that we've put through background checks, and we know who they are, you know, what they do, and we trust them all. And we're the conduit that lets them attack your infrastructure. But we do it in such a way, or we incentivize them in such a way that they're incentivized like the attacker, like the nation state attacker. They only get paid when they find bugs on your platform. And we handle the process of, you know, reviewing the bugs, deduplicating the bugs, and ensuring the bugs are of quality and their mediation steps are of quality. And so we essentially provide this continuous monitoring with a diverse set of eyes on your infrastructure. You know, the problem that I've always seen, and I think we see a lot, is that, you know, your internal red team sees the same stuff day after day after day, and they have the same skills. And so it's nice to get those other eyes on your product. So that's what we're doing. I help build into that platform and do a little research on the side. And so if you are interested in my research or any of my coworkers' research, check out synack.com. I think we have a little blog page and a little research page. We'll be launching a new site here soon. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at Colby Moore, and feel free to ask me any questions, email me, tweet me. Always happy to chat.
Colby, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming up. And we're going to have you on the Twit network more often. We've got plenty of shows that could probably benefit from your expertise.
I'd love to. Thank you.
And of course, I want to thank my co-host, without which I would not want to do This Week in Enterprise Tech. We always start with Brian, and he's got that privileged spot of being in Hawaii, so we're not doing that today. We're going to start with Curtis, the attractive one of the group. Curtis, with your strange pop-up tent covering your house of disaster behind you, could you please tell us what you're going to be doing on Information Week Radio over the next week or so?
Well, radio is not going to be super active in the next week. Next week is something of a short week because, as we all know, next weekend is a 3-day weekend for us. But I'm trying to make it up to people by having a couple of really good articles on Information Week this week. I'm looking at the way the various federal agencies use data analysis to do a couple of things. One is to fight fires, like the huge wildfires that have been having such an impact on the western part of North America this year. Has some great interviews, including a couple done via satellite phone with people who were in their tents on the fire lines out there. So that's going to be coming up. Also have an interview set up with the chief scientist of the group that does the hurricane models. And I may have a lot to talk with him about early this week. Both of those will be print articles at Information Week. Follow me on Twitter at KG4GWA to see when those go up. And I do hope that when they're online that you'll check them out and comment on them.
Fantastic. And of course, Mr. Brian Chee, the geek in paradise. Cheebert, I wish I could bring you to Maker Faire New York. I wish, because I owe you since you were sick at DEF CON, and I feel like, we didn't have time to bond. But do you have your own Maker Faire gearing up, right? I know you've got one coming up next year.
Yeah, we're also going to be at Iolani School again. One of the things that's actually happening is I am, been talking about my embedded systems lab. Well, that lab is going to be host to 2 to 3 new courses in global environmental sciences, where we're going to be teaching, embedded systems with the goal of creating more open source science instruments to try and make advanced science instrumentation available to even the poorest schools.
Fantastic. As always, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. It's also been a pleasure to speak to you. That's right, our audience, the person who downloads each and every single episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech. We wouldn't have a show without you. We wouldn't have 3 years of enterprise goodness if you didn't keep supporting us. And we want to do something for you. We want to make it easier for you to get all of our episodes and to share them with a friend. If you've got a friend who you think might want to hear what we talk about, might want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just go to twit.tv/twit. That's twit.tv/TWIET. There you'll find all of our back episodes, including the ones that you may need for reference. You'll find our show notes, and you'll also find a menu where you can choose to download the version of your choice to the device of your choice. If you want the audio version in your iPhone so you can listen to us on the way to work, maybe you want the video version on your tablet so that you can watch us in your breaks, or maybe, just maybe, you want the high-definition version so that you can see all of Colby Moore's cool gear in super high definition. Just go, again, to twit.tv/twiet. Also, don't forget that you can find me on Twitter. Just go to twitter.com/PadreSJ. That's at PadreSJ. You'll be able to find what we're going to be doing on every episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and you'll be able to suggest topics and guests for future episodes. It's a great way to feedback in case you want to interact with the show. We do the show live every Friday at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time. Just go to live.twit.tv. If you watch us live, you can watch the pre-show, the post-show, and everything in between, including everything that gets cut out of the finished downloadable version. So it's sort of a behind-the-scene, inside baseball look at the Twit TV creative process. And finally, I want to thank everyone here at the studio who makes this show possible. To Lisa, to Leo for letting us do This Week in Enterprise Tech. And of course, to my super producer, Karsten, and my absolutely fabulous TD, Brian Cranky Hippo Burnett. Brian, could you tell the folks where they might be able to find you?
Well, if you want to message me, you can find me on Twitter at cranky_hippo. But, Padre, I just want to mention Brian Chee isn't the only Brian you're leaving behind. You're also going to Interdrone without me.
Yeah, but I mean, Brian's the only one I care about.
Yeah, you care about Cheebert, right. Thanks, Padre.
Wow, that wasn't passive aggressive at all, Brian. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Oh, and by the way, next week, you may remember we had a story at the top of the show where we talked about the floating data center from Nautilus. We're going to have them on next week. In fact, I'm going to be dropping by their barge to take some B-roll just before the show. So if you want to see what the future of floating data looks like, you're going to want to check out Twite. Until next time, I'm Father Robert Ballecer, and remember, if you want to know what's going on in the Enterprise, just keep Twite.